Turn now to the urgent search for answers this morning after a deadly plane crash in Alaska.
The silence came first. Not the normal quiet of a waiting lounge or a delayed flight, but a silence that felt unnatural. One moment, the airport in Alaska was alive with its usual rhythm, announcements echoing, baggage carts rattling, passengers rushing to their gates. The next, everything stopped. Sirens pierced the air. Thick smoke rolled across the runways, and then came the order no one expected. The entire airport was shutting down. For Alaska, this wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a crisis. In most places, a grounded airport is a headache. In Alaska, it's a lifeline cut in half. And what triggered that shutdown was a terrifying plane crash that shook not only the state, but the aviation world far beyond it. From the first reports, it was clear this wasn't a minor incident. Witnesses described hearing the grinding of metal, the sudden loss of engine power, and then the impact that sent flames shooting into the sky. Fire crews scrambled across the tarmac, fighting against icy winds to contain the blaze. Passengers in the terminals pressed against the windows, their faces lit orange by the fire outside. The sound of twisting steel, the alarms echoing through the concourse, and the sight of emergency crews racing past created a scene of chaos that few will ever forget. 4 children clinging to their parents, 4 travelers stranded mid-journey, and for workers who suddenly found themselves in the middle of a disaster. The experience was seared into memory. The decision to shut the airport immediately was swift. Runways had to be cleared, debris removed, airspace locked down. Safety came first. But that shutdown was only the beginning of a ripple effect that would stretch far beyond a single terminal. To understand the weight of what happened, you have to understand Alaska. Unlike the rest of the United States, this state doesn't have highways connecting every city, or train lines that make cross-country travel possible. For many communities, air travel isn't a luxury, it's survival. A single shipment of medical supplies might be the difference between life and death for a small-town clinic. A cargo plane delivering groceries and essentials can determine whether isolated families make it through another week, and when a major airport in Alaska shuts down, the entire system collapses. In the lower 48 states, if one airport closes, another is usually just a few hours away by car. In Alaska, that option doesn't exist. Shut down one hub, and you don't just delay vacations, you cut off communities. That's the reality residents faced the moment flights stopped moving. Almost instantly, the effect spread. Cargo flights carrying food and medicine were halted. Small towns waiting on supplies were left in limbo. Families expecting loved ones at arrivals suddenly realized they had no idea when or if their flights would resume. Hospitals waiting on specialized equipment or critical medications were forced to brace for shortages. Businesses relying on just-in-time shipments found themselves scrambling, and for the thousands of travelers stranded inside the terminals, frustration gave way to something much heavier. The realization that this wasn't about delays, this was about survival. The fear spread quickly. If one accident could silence such a critical hub, what did that mean for the future? And as Alaska struggled to respond, the bigger question emerged. What exactly caused the crash? Flying in Alaska has always been different. The terrain is unforgiving. Towering mountains, unpredictable crosswinds, sudden storms, and icy runways make it one of the most dangerous regions in the world for pilots. Even the most skilled aviators, trained to navigate through narrow passes and blinding snow, remain vulnerable. Speculation began immediately. Some pointed to weather, with sudden wind shears possibly forcing the aircraft down. Others suggested mechanical failure, an unseen problem with the engines or controls. Still others whispered about pilot error, though investigators were careful to stress that no conclusions had been reached. What made the crash even more haunting was how sudden it seemed. Passengers and crew likely had little warning. One moment in the air, the next plummeting toward disaster. And as investigators combed through wreckage, the shutdown of the airport continued, paralyzing an entire region. It didn't take long for the effects to go beyond Alaska. Many people don't realize this, but Alaskan airports play a critical role in global aviation. Routes between Asia and North America often pass through or refuel in Alaska. Cargo shipments worth billions depend on smooth operations there. When the airport went dark, airlines scrambled to reroute flights, adding hours and millions of dollars in costs. Perishable goods faced stretches. Supply chains rippled with delays. Tourism, one of Alaska's most important industries, suddenly faced devastating uncertainty as visitors reconsidered their plans. Federal authorities began monitoring the situation closely. What started as a local crash quickly became a national problem, then an international one. And behind the logistical mess was an even bigger issue: trust. For years, travelers have been told that flying is the safest form of travel. Statistics prove it, but numbers don't erase images. The sight of wreckage on a runway does something statistics can't explain. It shakes confidence. For passengers stranded in terminals, many began quietly asking themselves, is it really safe to fly here? For communities that rely on aircraft to reach doctors, schools, or even grocery stores, that doubt wasn't just unsettling, it was terrifying. Trust is fragile, and once it breaks, it takes more than reassurances to rebuild. The crash had changed how people saw aviation in Alaska, and that shift carried consequences far beyond the airport walls. The crash forced uncomfortable truths into the spotlight. Alaska's airports are more vulnerable than many realized. Climate change is adding new risks, with storms becoming harder to predict, and permafrost thawing beneath runways. Indigenous communities, already facing isolation, were hit hardest when flights stopped. Lawmakers began asking whether Alaska needs specialized funding, better technology, and stronger systems to prevent future disasters. Aviation experts pointed out that pilots here face challenges unlike anywhere else in the country, and that maybe Alaska should be treated not just as another state, but as a testbed for the future of aviation safety. The shutdown wasn't just a pause, it was a warning, and the silence left behind after the crash carried a message few could ignore. In the end, the terrifying crash that silenced Alaska's airport was more than a single tragedy. It was a revelation, a reminder that even the strongest systems are fragile, that progress always carries risk, and that communities can be thrown into chaos in an instant. For the families waiting for loved ones, for the towns cut off from supplies, for the travelers stranded in silence, the crash became more than a story. It became a turning point. The question now isn't just what caused the accident, it's whether we're ready for the next one. Because when the skies go silent, everything stops. And the cost of that silence is felt everywhere. So what do you think? Was this crash a wake-up call that aviation in Alaska, and maybe across the world, needs a complete rethinking? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this story eye-opening, make sure to like, subscribe, and join us for more deep dives into the events shaping our world. Witnesses described an unfolding nightmare. One passenger said they heard the engines falter, then metal screeching, and finally a crushing impact that sent flames leaping into the sky. Fire crews, bundled against frigid winds, rushed across icy tarmac to fight flames threatening to spread. Smoke and chaos engulfed the scene. Inside the terminals, families pressed against windows, children clutched parents, and travelers froze in disbelief. Airline staff, trained for emergencies, scrambled to maintain order, even as fear gripped them. The sound of alarms, the sight of emergency vehicles racing past, and the smell of burning fuel created an atmosphere no one would forget. The airport shut down immediately, giving responders full access to the wreckage. Runways were cleared, debris inspected, and airspace secured. Yet the shutdown was only the start of a much larger story, one that would stretch far beyond Alaska. Alaska is unlike any other state. Vast, rugged, and sparsely connected, the state relies heavily on aviation. Highways don't link every city. Railways don't reach remote villages. In many places, a plane isn't just a way to travel, it's the only way to survive. When an airport closes here, it doesn't just inconvenience tourists, it halts supply chains, delays medical evacuations, and isolates communities. Cargo planes carrying essentials, small towns awaiting shipments, and hospitals counting on timely deliveries all face immediate consequences. The stakes are far higher than mere travel delays. The crash highlighted just how fragile Alaska's aviation network is. Unlike the lower 48, where multiple airports provide alternatives, shutting down a hub in Alaska sends ripple effects that touch every corner of the state. Turn now to the urgent search for answers this morning after a deadly plane crash in Alaska. The airport in Alaska fell into sudden silence after a devastating crash forced authorities to immediately shut down operations. The scene was unlike anything travelers or staff expected when the day began, turning what was supposed to be a routine passage through one of the state's critical aviation hubs into a moment of fear and chaos. Alaska has always depended heavily on its airports for both domestic and international connections. But this event underscored how fragile those connections can be when disaster strikes. The shutdown was swift and uncompromising, reflecting both the severity of the incident and the urgency to contain the situation before it grew even worse. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. From the very first reports, the seriousness of the crash was undeniable. Emergency sirens filled the air as first responders rushed toward the wreckage, their movements sharp and deliberate. Fire crews scrambled across the tarmac, struggling against the harsh Alaskan winds to control flames that were threatening to spread. The airport, once filled with the ordinary hum of passengers, baggage carts, and announcements over the intercom, became a space overtaken by smoke, confusion, and the stark reality that something catastrophic had just occurred. For many present, the sound of metal twisting and engines failing still rang in their ears. A reminder of how quickly a seemingly routine flight can turn into disaster. The decision to shut the airport immediately was not one taken lightly, but it was necessary. Airports function as critical arteries for a state like Alaska, where geography makes air travel one of the few reliable methods of connection. Yet, safety comes before continuity. The closure was designed to give rescue teams full unobstructed access to the crash site. It was also a way to prevent further risks. Runways had to be inspected for debris, airspace secured from further complications, and facilities reorganized to handle the influx of emergency services. Passengers inside the terminals watched with wide eyes as flights were grounded, gates closed, and departure boards filled with the word "cancelled." For many, frustration was quickly replaced by a sobering realization. This was bigger than travel delays. It was about survival and response. The crash raised urgent questions about how prepared the infrastructure in Alaska is to handle emergencies of such magnitude. While airports in the lower 48 states often have redundant systems and alternative hubs within driving distance, Alaska's remoteness changes the equation entirely. Shutting down one major airport does not just inconvenience travelers, it halts critical supply chains, medical transport routes, and regional connections that many isolated communities rely upon. Suddenly, the ripple effect was apparent. Cargo flights carrying essentials were rerouted or paused. Small towns waiting for supplies were left uncertain about when shipments might resume, and residents dependent on air access for medical treatment or personal travel faced indefinite delays. As the flames were battled and the wreckage examined, speculation swirled over what could have caused the crash in the first place. The geography of Alaska often poses unique challenges for aviation. Mountainous terrain, unpredictable winds, and rapidly shifting weather systems can turn even the most carefully charted flights into precarious journeys. Pilots often say that flying in Alaska demands a special skill set, and yet, even the most experienced aviators remain vulnerable when mechanical failures or sudden atmospheric changes strike. Observers noted that the crash unfolded so suddenly that passengers and crew likely had little warning. Adding to the terror of the event, the impact of the shutdown stretched beyond immediate logistics, bleeding into the psyche of those who rely on aviation in Alaska. Residents are acutely aware that unlike many places in the United States, highways and railways do not stretch far enough to cover the entire state. In some communities, flying is not a luxury, but a lifeline. With the airport closed, a wave of uncertainty rippled outward. Families waiting for loved ones, businesses dependent on just-in-time shipments, and even hospitals counting on incoming medical supplies found themselves in a precarious position. The shutdown, while necessary, highlighted how vulnerable these systems truly are when one link in the chain is disrupted. For those at the airport, when the crash happened, the experience etched itself into memory with stark clarity. Witnesses described the immediate aftermath, the smell of burning fuel, the sight of smoke billowing into the frigid sky, and the sound of alarms ringing throughout the terminal. Children cried as parents tried to shield them from the sight of emergency vehicles racing past windows. Airline staff trained for moments of crisis tried to keep order while processing the reality themselves. Passengers stranded in waiting areas exchanged worried looks, their complaints about delays fading as they grasped the gravity of what had occurred. The human element, fear, shock, and uncertainty became as much a part of the event as the wreckage. On the runway, as the hours dragged on, the closure remained firmly in place, and investigators began the painstaking work of documenting every detail. Though the event itself had already caused immense disruption, the airport could not risk reopening until all safety concerns were addressed. Runways needed to be cleared, wreckage analyzed, and systems checked for damage. Even a minor oversight could lead to another tragedy. For many in the aviation industry, the shutdown represented not just a pause in travel, but a necessary reset to ensure no further danger loomed overhead. The implications extended nationally as well. News of the crash and closure spread rapidly, igniting conversations about aviation safety and the unique challenges of operating in extreme environments. Alaska's air routes serve as vital connectors, not just within the state, but between the United States and international destinations across the Pacific. Any disruption sends ripple effects across a much larger network. Airlines scrambled to reroute flights. Logistics companies adjusted schedules, and federal authorities monitored the situation closely. The shutdown was no longer just an Alaskan problem. It had become part of a broader discussion about resilience in aviation. Beyond logistics, the psychological impact of such crashes is immense. Travelers who had long trusted the safety of air travel were shaken. Even with statistics showing that flying remains one of the safest modes of transportation, the raw reality of an aircraft crumpled on the runway was difficult to reconcile with numbers and reassurances. For Alaska, where residents often have no alternative but to board small or mid-sized aircraft for essential travel, confidence in the system took a blow. Rebuilding that confidence would require not just explanations, but visible actions to ensure safety was being prioritized. Communities across the state watched developments anxiously, knowing the airport shutdown was more than an inconvenience. It was a disruption of their lifeline. Remote towns awaited word on when flights might resume, while city dwellers contemplated how such a critical hub could be brought down so suddenly. The crash underscored how dependent Alaska is on aviation, and how a single catastrophic event can send shockwaves through every corner of the state. People spoke about the fragility of their systems, the unpredictability of their environment, and the need for stronger safeguards to prevent such disruptions in the future. This moment served as a reminder of the delicate balance between progress and vulnerability in aviation. Airplanes bring distant regions closer, but the cost of failure is high. The crash and the subsequent shutdown revealed how quickly order can collapse into chaos, and how preparedness is not just a policy, but a necessity. The emergency teams who responded demonstrated bravery and determination, yet the questions hanging in the smoky air were larger than any immediate rescue could answer. Why did it happen? Could it have been prevented? And how would Alaska recover from both the physical and psychological impact? The implications also reached into the economy. Tourism, one of Alaska's key industries, relies heavily on smooth and reliable air travel. A sudden shutdown creates not only logistical headaches, but reputational damage as visitors reconsider their trips. For business owners in hospitality, guiding, and transportation, the crash represented an unseen threat to livelihoods that depend on travelers feeling secure. The event painted a stark picture of how interconnected every facet of life in Alaska is with its airports and how fragile that network becomes when disaster strikes. While the flames were eventually brought under control and the immediate danger contained, the closure stretched on, prolonging the sense of disruption. Airports are symbols of movement, progress, and connection. And to see one silenced so abruptly was jarring. Every minute of shutdown carried weight. Every hour deepened the impact. Yet beneath the frustration lay a universal understanding. The crash had changed everything, and nothing could move forward until safety was restored. The terrifying crash at the Alaskan airport was not just a singular event, but a moment that illuminated vulnerabilities stretching across systems, communities, and psyches. It disrupted lives, altered plans, and shook confidence in one of the most critical infrastructures of the state. The silence that followed the shutdown was filled not just with waiting, but with the recognition of fragility and the demand for resilience.